Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Noel McKeon and I am the Business Development Manager for IntelliTrack. IntelliTrack is the simplest way to manage your inventory. This session will focus on comparing and contrasting the concepts of inventory items and assets in IntelliTrack. Please note that while items is a core concept available in both IntelliTrack Inventory and IntelliTrack Assets, Assets is only available with our IntelliTrack Assets product. Oftentimes it seems that there is some confusion about working with inventory items and assets within IntelliTrack, especially when your account has access to both concepts. And we intend to clear that confusion up today during this session. So during the session today, we will define what an item is, and then we'll define what an asset is. And then we'll talk about some of the similarities and some of the differences between the two. Finally, we'll take a look at working with both items and assets in IntelliTrack. What is an item? By definition, an item is an individual article or unit, especially one that is part of a list, collection, or set. In terms of your business and managing your inventory with IntelliTrack, the last part of that definition is very important. Part of a list, collection, or set, meaning that typically an item exists in multiple quantities and are things, goods, or materials that are used, sold, or stored by your organization. Items are typically produced or ordered, stocked, and then sold by your business. Some alternative words used in lieu of item would be things like part number, SKU, SKU, component, etc. And common examples of items include things like office supplies, repair parts, raw materials, finished goods, and packaging materials. What is an asset? By definition, an asset is a useful or valuable thing. An asset typically has value and unique attributes that need to be tracked. An asset may help generate revenue, be used by employees for specific tasks or jobs, require periodic maintenance or calibration, and depreciate over time with a useful lifespan and specific salvage value. If any of these attributes ring true about the object or objects you're looking to track, then it's likely best treated as an asset. Common examples of assets include office furniture, tools, vehicles, laptops, desktop servers, telephones, computer equipment. Even people or employees can be treated as assets. Okay, now let's take a look at how items and assets are similar. To start off with, both are items. Let that sink in for a moment and let me explain what I mean by that. An item is obviously an item, but an asset is also an item. It's just a unique and specific example of an item. In fact, an asset cannot exist in IntelliTrack without being related to an item. So there is this unique relationship between items and assets. Assets can inherit certain attributes from the item it's tied to. Attributes like the model, the manufacturer, the category, and description all come from the item. We often describe the item-asset relationship as a parent-child relationship. As a child inherits certain attributes from his or her parents, an asset inherits certain attributes from the item it is tied to. Another similarity is that both items and assets exist in your inventory and are tied to a quantity on hand and a specific site location. Additionally, you can perform various inventory control functions like inventories and moves on each. Lastly, both require unique identifiers when getting set up in the system. The unique identifier for the item in IntelliTrack is the item number, and the unique identifier for the asset in IntelliTrack is the asset number. Now let's talk about some of the differences. First, items typically exist in multiple quantities, and assets are singular and unique within IntelliTrack. An asset has a number of extra characteristics that an item does not have. An asset can be fixed in a single location or a handful of locations over its lifespan, or it can rotate in and out of different employees' possession. So assets can be checked out or checked in, but an item cannot. An asset can require periodic maintenance, calibration, or reservations, and hence these functions can be applied to an asset, but not to an item. An asset has a useful lifespan and it depreciates over time, and you can set up depreciation classes and schedules for your assets. Items, however, do not depreciate. Typically, items are considered consumable, so they do not have a lifespan. Once they are used, shipped, or consumed, they are gone and no longer within your inventory. And lastly, assets have a salvage value. The salvage value is the estimated resale value of an asset at the end of its useful life. Again, because items do not have a useful lifespan, a salvage value does not apply to them. Okay, let's move over to IntelliTrack and take a hands-on look at working with both items and assets within the system. So now that we have some meaningful background on items and assets, let's start working with them. The first thing we will do is show how you create an item in IntelliTrack. Assuming you're already logged into your IntelliTrack account, you simply go to the Manage Items option to open up the Manage Items screen. To add a new item, you start by clicking on the Add Item button in the top right of the screen, and the Add Item screen will appear. And the first thing we want to do is fill in our item details. So let's go ahead and start with item number. You'll notice that there is a red star next to item number. That indicates that this is a required field. The item number is the identifier for our item. It must be unique. It doesn't necessarily have to be a number. It's an alphanumeric field that accepts both letters and numbers. And let's go ahead and call our first item number A100. The alternate number field is optional. It's a secondary identifier. You don't have to enter anything there, so we'll go ahead and leave that blank. And then we get to the description field, which is an important field because it describes what the item is. In this case, we're creating a new item, a new consumable item, and we're going to go ahead and this is going to be a box of paper. So we're going to go ahead and enter in a description, box of paper 8.5 by 11. Notice there are fields for model, manufacturer, and category as well. These can all be set up ahead of time. I went ahead and did that and populated these with some values by choosing Manage Lookups from the menu option up top. Note that there is a comment field that can be used to store additional information about the item. And you can also add a picture of your item if you like. Simply click Browse, get to the appropriate picture that you want to tie to that item, and click the Upload button. Now, let's talk about the checkboxes down here underneath the picture of the item. Depending on your divisional settings and how you have your options set up in your IntelliTrack account, you can choose to have IntelliTrack track things like serial numbers, lots, or expiration dates for each item that you create. To enable any of these features, you simply click the corresponding checkboxes next to them, and IntelliTrack will help you manage those fields respectively, depending on what you've configured. We'll discuss this asset checkbox in detail a little bit later, but for now, let's go ahead and move on to the next tab, which is the User-Defined Fields tab. UDFs are a great way to store extra information or customize IntelliTrack to suit your company's needs. For instance, it might be important to know the weight of a given item. You could use UDF1 and store a weight in this field, and you can actually rename and customize the titles for any field, including the UDFs in our application, in another section of the program. So instead of just saying UDF1, you could have it read weight. Let's move over to the Units of Measure tab. Every item must have a unit of measure. Units of measure are set up ahead of time in the Manage Lookup screen. By default, the unit of measure is EA, or each. Since we want to know how many boxes of paper we have in inventory, we'll go ahead and keep the EA, each unit of measure, as the unit of measure in this case, but you could add additional and have different breakdowns if you like. You can also enter the unit cost here if you like. So you simply click on the edit button, you can populate the unit cost, and then click the save button when you're done. Finally, we have our reorder points tab, which allows us to set a min, max, and reorder point. Again, this is dependent on how your divisional options are configured. We'll go ahead and choose Site 1. We'll set the minimum to 25. We'll set the maximum to 100. And we'll set our reorder point to 50. Go ahead and click the Add button, and the values that you set up here will impact if and when this item shows up on the inventory reorder report. So it looks like our item is complete. Let's go ahead and save all of the changes that we just made in populating this data by clicking the Save button in the bottom right. And we're back to our Manage Item screen, and we can see a summary view of that particular A100 box of paper item we just created. So far we've only created a single item in the system, and we can add the item to inventory later. We're going to come back to that. All we've done thus far is create an item very manually by just populating the data as we just went through. So what about assets? Well, you start out by creating an asset in very much the same way you do as creating an item. You must first create an asset item, which will later have individual assets associated or tied to it. Remember the parent-child relationship I talked about a little earlier. So once again, we start by clicking the Add Item button in the top right to open up the Add Item screen, and we'll populate an item number. In this case, we're going to use B200 as our item number, and our description is going to be Dell Laser Printer. We'll populate our lookup values appropriately with a model, a manufacturer, and a category. We could upload a picture if we want, but most importantly here, we're going to now spend some time and talk about this asset checkbox. This field is what tells IntelliTrack that we want to treat this particular item as an asset item. So let's go ahead and check and enable that checkbox. And notice that once we do this, the Checkout Rental Settings tab appears, and that's because that's only appropriate and available for asset items. So we could continue populating more data if we needed to, or we can simply decide that we're finished. We've got all the data that we want. We're going to go ahead and click the Save button. And so now back on the Manage Item screen, we can see both the box of paper item and the Dell Laser Printer asset item. The best way to spot the difference between these two is over on the right-hand side of the screen. The Add Assets button is disabled for our box of paper, the item, but it is enabled and available for the asset item we created for the Dell Laser Printer. So, next step, again, all we've done is defined an item and an asset item in the system. Now let's go ahead and take you guys through this final step of actually adding an asset and some items to our inventory. Okay, we begin this process by selecting the Add, and let's first work with an asset. We're going to go ahead and add an asset to the system, and we begin by clicking the Add Assets button next to the B200 item that we've created. Asset number, the asset screen appears. We can click on the Add Asset button in the top right. And the first thing we need to enter is our asset number. Again, this is a unique identifier and it is required. You see the asterisk marking that. So let's go ahead and make it A1000. We can populate a serial number, the Dell serial number in this case. We can also associate the asset and put it into a site and location. Let's go ahead and choose Site 1, Office 101. Those are drop-down values. Again, those were pre-populated, as is the assignee. The assignee is the person responsible for the asset. Assignees were set up ahead of time using Manage Assignees. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that value down, and we'll choose Tom Smith. You'll once again notice a comment field to store extra information about this particular asset. You can upload a picture of this particular asset. This is different from the picture that we uploaded earlier for the item we set up. Assets have their own set of 24 unique user-definable fields. These can be renamed just like the other UDFs that we talked about, as can any field in our application. We have a warranty tab which allows us to enter the unique purchase date, purchase cost, warranty expiration date, condition, and account associated with the asset. There is a maintenance calibration tab where we can set the maintenance and calibration periods for the asset. There is a checkout tab which simply would log information and display it for us if this asset were already checked out. And then finally there is a documents tab which allows us to attach unique documents that might be important for this particular asset. Things like user manuals, sales receipts, service history would be some examples of useful documents we might want to upload and store in our IntelliTrack account and tie it to this given asset. Once you have all the asset data you want successfully entered, you can come back to the Asset tab, select the Save button in the bottom right of the screen, and Asset A1000 now appears on the Asset screen. And here we can see how it is actually tied to the asset item B200. That's a good indication, visual indication of that unique relationship between the parent asset item number and the individual asset record. Simply then select the Cancel button to close out of that form. And you'll notice that nothing really has changed on the Manage Items screen, since all we did was create an asset and an item. So earlier, where is the asset that we just set up? Well, if we select Assets, Assets Data from our Assets menu, we open the Asset Data form, and now we can see a summary view of the information about the asset we just created. It's Asset A1000, it's located in Site 1, Office 101, and it's assigned to Tom Smith. If we like, we can select the Edit button here to open up and access that same screen we were on earlier and edit the asset information if we needed to do that again. So here's another place where you can get into the Asset Details screen and edit those details if you need to. Because our asset was added to a site and location, it exists in inventory. So if we go to Inventory, Inventory Data, here as well, we'll see that the asset is listed. Site 1, Office 1, the item number, and the asset is listed for us. So we see the Dell printer, but what about any boxes of paper, the item that we created earlier? We don't see any of these, and that's because we have not yet actually added those to inventory. Now, there are a number of ways, different ways to add items to inventory. For today's purposes, during this session, we're going to show the simplest method. We're going to do it simply by choosing Manage Items, and we're going to select the Add to Inventory button, which is right over here, to bring up the Add Item to Inventory screen. The item number, site, and unit of measure are already filled in for us, so simply select the location where we want to locate this material and enter the quantity. We'll choose location 1, we'll key in 20, and then we click the Save button. That's it. It's as simple as that to add an item to inventory. Now if we go back over to Inventory, Inventory Data, we'll see that we're actually viewing a combination of our inventory, and we can see both the Dell laser printer and the box of paper are in our inventory and have been successfully added. The inventory item A100 and the asset item B200 are both shown together. This is a mixed view of our inventory, and it's useful for everyday inventory control purposes. You can actually toggle between the two and have the system segregate the data that it shows you. So I can show one the other, or both. But this is also a great way to visually represent the differences between items and assets. You'll notice that the inventory item is not associated with an asset number and has a multiple on-hand quantity of 20, whereas the asset item is associated with a unique asset number and only has an on-hand quantity of 1 because it is unique in the system. We have discussed what an item is, what an asset is, compared and contrasted the two, and also showed the process for creating items and assets in IntelliTrack and how to add them to inventory. If you have comments or questions, please contact us directly by calling 888-583-3008, option 8, or email us at sales@intellitrack.com. We welcome all customer feedback. We look forward to answering any questions you may have. Please visit the resources section of IntelliTrack.com to register for our other upcoming webinars. Thank you for attending.